Share screen. Make sure I just get this. Share.
Might leave that one off. Might leave that one off.
Oh, yeah. I'll show the video after. So you have this God, right? So you go in front of the scale of judgment. So what they do is they will take out your heart. I don't know how non-gory or bloody this is supposed to be, but they take out your heart and they weigh it. So they weigh it to a feather. So if you're lived a life that was full of sin, if easy way to explain it, your heart would weigh more than the feather. And so if your heart weighed more than the feather, your heart would be given to this crocodile thing. You see that? It's like a mix between like a crocodile and a lion. And so you wouldn't have an afterlife. Your afterlife sucks, right? Because your heart's in the belly of a gator.
Wait, you stay alive? Oh, well,
I mean, you're already dead. So I mean, this is kind of like the pearly gates thing. Like you're up there, and so your heart now. So, anyways, let's get back on. So if your heart weighed more than the feather, your heart would be thrown into the belly of a gator, the mouth of a gator, lion thing, right? But if you lived a life of righteousness, you did everything you were supposed to do. You were a good person, right? Your feather would weigh less than your heart would weigh less than a feather, right? And so this idea is that you have to live a good life to be able to have a good afterlife. So your afterlife is based about your deeds on earth. Does that make sense? Kind of get an idea of what that means. Yeah. So do you think if you're greedy, are you gonna have a pretty good afterlife? Is your heart gonna be light? No. What if you're a charitable person that gives away their money all the time? Yeah, you're good, right? What other deeds do you guys think could get you into their afterlife, a good afterlife? Start throwing ideas out. Think of good things, bad things. Giving somebody a kidney. Yeah, I mean, hey, honestly, yeah, probably. That'd probably get you into the afterlife. What else?
Help someone with farm work.
There, yeah, helping your community. Helping those people that need help. What else? Okay, yeah, that's probably a lot. We'll get into it. They have 2,000 gods and goddesses. So they probably have a lot of rules. Each of the gods probably, I mean, they have like a hierarchy of gods. Some of them are like, also, I don't know if you guys know what demigods are, but it's like the mixture between humans and God. Like, yeah. So they had like these ideas. But they had a huge, complex system for the religion. We'll get into that more in a little bit. All right. So let's go back. Let's get into our PowerPoint. Okay, pyramids. All right. So we're gonna get into Egypt. It's kind of this. Egypt is a very interesting place because it's like one of those rich. It's like one of the first civilizations, like Mesopotamia. It has a long history. It has almost one of the longest histories in the world because we see the Egyptians all the way up into the classical era and a little bit beyond into Rome. There's still Romans that actually there was Romans that ended up being Egyptian pharaohs, but we'll get into that later. All right. So Egypt is along the Nile River. The Egyptian settlements along the Nile River. Does anybody know how where the Nile River is? Right? Egypt, right? It's in the middle of a desert, right? So it's a narrow, fertile strip. It's this little tiny river. Well, it's not tiny, but it's this river in the middle of a desert. So I'll give you a little idea of what this looks like through Google Earth. Ooh, wrong one. I hate this. Okay.
Just type in.
There it is. So, what's around Egypt? What does that look like? Nothing, right? Just barren land. But what's this? What do you see here? A river and all that green around it, right? So you have this. You have all this desert. Let's zoom out. This is a upside down view of the. So look at all this desert. This is you guys know this is the Sahara Desert. Yeah. What's over here? More desert, right? What's right here? The Red Sea. So you have, it's literally just desert, desert, Red Sea. Do you think that has significance for Egypt in the future? Okay, so we'll get into that more, but yeah, so it's literally just a narrow strip of river and land that is arable and you can grow crops on. That's just that little tiny strip. So the gift of the Nile. So we talked about how yesterday on how Mesopotamian river systems were very it was very unpredictable. But the Nile has a very predictable yearly flood pattern that could get it down almost to a science. But the good thing about it is this flooding would bring about this black mud that has silt in it that would fertilize the soil around it. So they went through the cycle of it'd be like a normal river, then it would flood, and then it'd go back to the normal river, and then so they could farm on the flooded areas, and it would have been fertilized by the flooding river. So farmers also built irrigation so they could get water from the rivers. This would have been like canals and piping, like a rudimentary form of piping. They also believed that the Egyptian, the Nile itself was an Egyptian god. So the river itself was considered a deity or a god. The story of the Nile is I can't tell you the story, it's a little weird. It's not really appropriate for school, but the Egyptians worship it as a god. That's all you need to know. So the geography, as we already saw, it's that little narrow strip. But there is so why do you think light floods would reduce crop yield? Why do you think so? Think about what we just talked about. No, light floods. So there's not as much water coming down, right? So what happens? I just explained it. What happens when it floods? It deposited what? The silt? The silt. So if you have light flood, do you think you're going to get as much silt deposited around the area? No. So what would happen is they'd have a lighter flood, and they wouldn't get as much land fertilized, and so it wouldn't be as productive, right? But why do you think a heavy flood would something that would bring more fertilization cause more problems though? Okay, death. What else? Come on. What do floods do? Okay, so yeah, flood houses. Maybe it takes all the topsoil away, so you have nothing to plant on. Yeah, stuff like that. It destroys houses, destroys property. It can kill animals that get stuck in it. So you don't want too heavy of a flood because it can cause damages. So you want something in the middle. You want a medium flood that floods the fields but doesn't destroy properties. And then again, desert isolation protected Egyptians. So do you think it's easy to invade somebody from a desert? Because you need what? Water? You need complex supply trains. So you have water, food, and different things for an invasion. So that's gave the Egyptians a natural barrier from invasion. So Egypt is broken up into different areas. It's the Upper Egypt, which Upper Egypt is actually southern part of Egypt, and then Lower Egypt is Lower Egypt is considered the northern part, right? Yes. Okay. Sorry, I'm getting myself confused. So it's split up into two parts. So there's the Lower Egypt, which is the river delta, the river delta, which is right here. This is Lower Egypt, right? So that's actually the northern part. So it's flipped. So it's the northern part is Lower Egypt because that's where the delta is, and the upper part is the southern part because that's where most of the Old Kingdom is and where all the mountains, that's where all the water comes from. So if you didn't know, the Nile River actually flows from south to north and not north to south. So think about, you think about the Mississippi. Where does it come from? The north, right? It comes from north to south. So the path of least resistance for the Nile River is from south to north, which is kind of weird. Not most rivers don't flow from south to north. And so the southern part is considered the Upper Kingdom because it's based on the flow of the river. Yeah, so, okay, so right here, this is south. This is southern Egypt, right? Just look at the map, it's kind of flipped. But this right here, would be considered Upper Egypt, and the river flows from south to north into Lower Egypt, if that makes sense. So it's based on the flow patterns. So you have to go upriver, right, which is south, so that'd be Upper Egypt.
Why would a river flow? It's not north and south. Why would a river flow down or up? Based upon gravity, based upon elevation. Okay? You look at a map, and it doesn't matter north or south. Most all rivers flow north or south. Okay? They flow from the north to the south. That's just the way we kind of think of up is north and down is south. But if you think of a flow of water, if you pour water on your desk, what's the water naturally going to do? It's going to run off to the lowest point, right? That's where you find out what the balance is like. So the same thing with water, it's going to take the path of least resistance, so therefore it's going to go downhill. Okay?
Yeah.
Water always will flow downhill.
And so if you look up here, there's mountains. Right in this area, there's like a mountain region. Into Ethiopia, it's mountainous back here. And so it comes from the mountains and then flows. It follows this path from the mountains and then flows. Does that make sense? Kind of get the idea of why it's called Upper and Lower Kingdom. It's based on where the river flows. All right, PowerPoint. So the river area south of the first cataract is elevated. It becomes the Upper Egypt. And a cataract, I told this wrong last class, is actually where boulders turn the Nile. Like, so these giant boulders, and what they do is they turn the Nile River into rapids, like very strong water. So it'd be like, you have like a smooth flowing river. You have a smooth flowing river, and all of a sudden it hits a boulder, these two big boulders. So there's boulders here, and it comes into like rapids. It gets really strong. So you have like this smooth rolling river, hits all these boulders, and gets really strong. And then as it goes by, you get smoother river. So it's like these areas of like really rapid, strong moving water is what cataracts are. And then we're not going to talk about this, but it's kind of an interesting fact. The way that Egyptian pharaohs would figure out how good they did as a king is by how many cataracts they captured. So if there's like on the river, I think there's 8, if I remember correctly, but we're just gonna so if you have 3 like cataract areas, right? So if you would only capture 1, well, you're an okay king. But if you capture 2, you're even better. And if you captured all 3 of them, you're even better. Does that make sense? That's how they yeah, so like, yeah, so every, like their territory, the first territory was up to this area, right? But now since they captured this one, it would move. So every time they would signify progress by how many cataracts they took. But throughout their history, they would take some, they would lose some, they'd take some, they'd lose some. So. And then as we showed on the last one from it, does anybody know what a delta is? An idea of what a delta is? Can someone give me an idea what a delta is? Like a pretty easy deposition or sediment. That's true. Yes. What does that cause? What is the deposition of the sediment cause to a river? It clogs it up. It moves it. So it'll look like you have a river, right? It's flowing. It deposits all the sediment. So now it does this. It makes a bunch of different little offshoots, right? So it looks like a hand. So you have one arm. So it looks like a good way to hit it is your arm ends in a hand. So you have all these rivers that come off of this one river. Right? So that's what a delta is. United in a kingdom. So there used to be, at first, Lower and Upper Egypt were ruled by different people. But they were ruled by priest or a different king or some type of warlord, something like that. So there wasn't an actual unified Egypt until King Narmer united them about 3000 BC and making their capital Memphis. And it established the first Egyptian dynasty. So this is one of the first dynasties. We talked about dynasties yesterday. Can anybody tell me what a dynasty is again?
A family that is enrolled for a long period.
Exactly. So you have a family you have a person like King Narmer who starts a kingdom. He captures all this land, and then now his descendants, usually the oldest son, would take control after that point. After each death, the oldest son would take control. Pharaohs rule as a god. Does anybody know of any pharaohs by any chance? King Tut, good. Yes. What else? There's some famous ones. Cleopatra, yes. So those are some examples of pharaohs. King Tut, Cleopatra. Cleopatra is one of the few female pharaohs. Right. So pharaohs were almost like deities. They're almost like gods. They were considered the god kings. They were kings that were up to a status of gods. So they were in control of not only the governmental part of running the kingdom, but they were also the head priest of the religion. And so they also were military generals. They would control their forces. They would actually ride out and fight with their forces. And then they'd also take care of the well-being of their nations. They wouldn't do this alone. They had advisors. They had people under them that would help them, but they were still in charge of most of these areas. But yes, so the Egyptians pharaohs were god kings. And then again, like we talked about last class, their authority and governmental system is based off of theocracy. So they get power from the religion, and they use their religious power and authority to control the masses. So they used government and religion are one thing. Builder of the pyramids. So what's so important about the pyramids? What do they do? Signify power. That's a good one. What else? Big tombs. Good. What else? Temples. Yes, they'd be like religious areas. Good. So do you think there's the 3 pyramids that we see? Those are the only pyramids? Or do you think there's more? There's more, right? So pyramids went through a progression. They didn't all just look like the Great Pyramid of Giza at the first. That wasn't the first pyramid that was ever built. They first started as these mounds. They were mounds. They were like these large, like stair steps almost. So they kind of look like this. So they'd be like this. Oh God, I'm full of blood going. So it'd be like that. And then you'd have another level that would be stair stepped. And they'd look like that. So they were called stepped pyramids. You see these, and also you see pyramid like these from Mesoamerica. They made the similar pyramids, and also some parts of South America too. They also had pyramids that would start like a pyramid, right? Like this. They would start perfectly. You didn't see that, right? They start perfectly, and then they would cut off really short. No, that's actually really bad. They would cut off like this. That doesn't really look like a pyramid, right? Looks more like a spearhead. And so they took a progression from just mounds that kind of look like pyramids to this, to these weird looking pyramids, to the actual pyramids we see today, the good looking pyramids. But that takes a lot of progress. That takes a lot of technology, ideas to be able to create these things, right? So these pyramids were made of 2 tons to 15-ton blocks. Anybody tell me what something that might weigh about 2 tons? A car, a truck. What else? Elephant. Good. So they would have to actually, as you saw in that video, they would pull these blocks, these massive blocks up ramps by hand. They might use some animals. There's like ox and stuff like that, but they were mostly pulled by hand. Do you think it takes a lot of work to know how to cut one of these stones perfectly, right? So do you think skilled craftsmen or slaves were actually working on the pyramid? Skilled craftsmen. So there's a misconception that a lot of people, it's an old way of thinking is that the pyramids were built by slaves. It's incorrect. Most of the workers that worked on the pyramid were actually artisans, craftsmen, builders. They were paid. They were people that had a certain training to be able to do this. And so they were paid with grain, bread, and beer. So basically they lived off of their work. That makes sense. The slaves that they did had were mostly the people that would probably make the food, make the beer, and also like gather resources. And they probably wouldn't have been doing the actual building itself. So religion. So we talked about their little judgment thing, right? So Egyptians believe in 2,000 gods, which is a polytheistic religion. We'd already talked about this. Do you think that's do you think that'd be really hard to remember every god, be able to know exactly who they are, their teachings and what they do, right? But what they did is they used their massive amount of gods to be able to describe different events that were happening or different phenomenon that were happening in the world. So that god would cause that, if that makes sense. Like they have a sun god, which is Ra, which is right there. So there's sun god, and then you also have Osiris, which is the god of the deaths. And there's also the goddess Isis, who is the goddess of the ideal woman. So there's different, each of their gods represents something. They do something. They have a significance in everyday life. They also have an afterlife, which they would use for their judgment. As you saw the balance, that's how they judged your, if you got into afterlife or not. Does anybody know what a mummy is? Pretty sure everybody knows what a mummy is, Halloween costume, stuff like that. Do you know how they mummified somebody? Does anybody have an idea? Any idea? Okay, does anybody know what embalming is? No? It's like something like that. Taking out their organs, yes. Preserve them. Okay, so when you mummify something, right? What you want something, that means they want it to last a long time, right? What degrades in your body? Everything, right? Once you die, everything goes. So do you want a bunch of blood and organs in your body if you're trying to preserve it? No. So a lot of what they would do is they would take out organs out of your body. Certain organs are considered sacred, certain organs were considered trash. So some of the organs they wouldn't even use. Believe it or not, they didn't believe that their brain was that important. They thought it was kind of a useless matter. They would actually just throw it away sometimes. Sometimes people would keep it, but the majority of the time they throw it away. But do you know how they take your brain out of your head? How they would do it? No, actually not. They wouldn't stab it and cut it out. They use this long hook that they would stick up your nose, scramble up your head, your brain, and then pull it out. That's how they got it out of your brain. But they'd drain your blood. They'd put embalming fluid into you. They'd put stuff to preserve you, to dry you out so your body would last longer, right? And so they would also have this thing called the Book of the Dead, which is prayers and spells, and it was supposed to guide your soul to the afterworld, to the afterlife. Something cool about the Egyptian religion is that, especially if you're a pharaoh, when you got buried, that would be your place in the afterlife. It'd be like this elaborate temple, an elaborate complex. So a lot of pharaohs were buried with their cats, their dogs, their slaves, sometimes their wives. They would also be buried with like boats and different things so they could use it in the afterlife. So everything they brought with them into the afterlife, they could use. So they would end up like, there'd be slaves, cats, dogs, a bunch of different things within their tombs. So if you look at, just like the Mesopotamians, you think they would have a social structure too? Because now there's a conglomeration of wealth, you have hierarchies, you have kings. So they had a very similar thing. They looked like they explained it as a pyramid. So you have the leader at top, you have the pharaoh himself, and then his advisors and priests would be at the top of the pyramid, right? They'd be towards the top with the pharaoh on top. But as you worked your way down, you'd have people of lesser power, like craftsmen, merchants, stuff like that, all the way down to your slaves. But the way you got, for them, they had a fluid. You could move your way up into society. And this was based off marriage, so you can marry into a higher society. You could also based by merit. So if you were a soldier and you did some valiant or crazy thing that got you in the eyes of the king, you could be moved up in the social pyramid. You could become a general. You could become an officer, something that would elevate you into away from common status. So there was ways to move in their society. And also women had similar rights to men. They weren't, they could own businesses just like the Mesopotamians. They could have stores, businesses, and they could have their own life. They weren't like other societies where they were just saw as lesser. They were almost up to the same status. Egyptian writing. So do you guys remember when we looked at the cuneigraph? The little kind of dashes, cuts, and stuff. So it's, hieroglyphs are like that, but they look more like, see that? They would look more like this. What do some of those things look like? What can you pick out from that?
Bird.
You can see a bird, right? A snake. So the different pictures that mean something. Maybe the snake means something. I don't know exactly. I can't read hieroglyphs, but these different things. If you guys like conspiracy theories, doesn't that kind of look like a spaceship? So there's different. So this is what they would kind of look like. They'd look like just different things that meant different things. This looks like a blade. This looks like either a bird or a chicken. This might look like a windmill. So they would mean something. It would actually mean something. Each of these pictures would mean a sound, a phrase, a word. There's different. They would all have different meanings. Does anybody know what papyrus is by any chance? So it's a plant, right? Yeah, it's what they wrote on. So it'd be like it was their, instead of just writing on tablets and walls, they would actually had a very simple form of paper. If any of you guys have played Minecraft, it's basically this. It's like the sugar cane, and you make it into paper. It's pretty much the same product. Like it's just like that. They would take these reeds that grew out of the ground from the river. They would break them down, and they'd turn them into paper. If you guys know how paper is made now, you just crush a bunch of wood pulp, and then they press it and then into like a strand of paper, a sheet of paper. It's kind of the same process. So they had a lot of Egyptian science. So they had a lot of technology. They invented things. They actually developed the 365-day calendar we use with the 12 months. They were the first. They were the people that developed this. There was other ways they broke up the world, but this is the way they did it. They developed a writing system of numbers. So they had an actual number system, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. They actually had a system for that. I don't know exactly what it looks like. It's probably just dashes, but they had actual written number forms. And so geometry. What do you think is so important about geometry for the Egyptians? Build pyramids. You couldn't build the pyramids without geometry, right? You have to get everything perfectly right, or it'd look weird. Or they also created elaborate palaces and kingdoms, walls, structures. Like massive structures were built by the Egyptians. So you need geometry to be able to do so. They had skilled engineers and architects. You had to be able to construct palaces and pyramids. You couldn't do that with just normal people. You need to have people that were smart in engineering, how to lift these blocks, how to move blocks, and architecture, how to design it, make sure every inch or everything's right. They also had a popular form of medicine, had a lot of medicinal plants, and they also had rituals, which we consider like witchcraft nowadays. They look kind of like that. This was the way they healed people. So we talked about how there was this natural barrier, the desert. It's hard to invade. Well, that didn't convince everybody that they could invade. So the power of the pharaohs started to decline in 2100 BC. And this is considered the end of the Old Kingdom. It's where the Egyptian timeline's considered there's the Old Kingdom, there's the Middle Kingdom, and then there's the New Kingdom. And so there's a difference. That's the way they kind of split it up. In the Middle Kingdom, which was about 400 years, about 2000 BC to 1600 BC, you have the pharaohs start to regain a little bit of their control after invasions. They improved, during this time, they improved trade. They dug canals from the Nile to the Red Sea. Does anybody know where the Red Sea is in location towards Egypt? No? So, yeah, it'd be east. So if we look at Google Earth, so here's the Red Sea, right? They'd actually build canals from here to there. Do you think that's a short, small canal? No, that's a long canal from here to there. Even from here to there, that's a long canal. So they built canals from here to get to the Red Sea for trade, right? Because from here, where can they trade? Pretty much all around here. And they already had a natural way into the Mediterranean. There was Cyprus. There was a early form of Greeks, so they could have traded in this area. Lebanon, Israel, so they could have all in this area. There was a trade. That didn't sound good. So the Hyksos, I believe is how you say it, they moved in Egypt from Palestine. So this was a cultural group that ended up ruling for about 100 years. They were from like what we would think of like modern day Israel is. they moved in to the to this which, and this would be kind of bring about the new period, the new kingdom period. And that's it on that one. So you guys do have a quiz. Know what you guys are gonna do, but I'm gonna show you guys something first.